Hello and welcome to a very special session in the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival. Perhaps today I really need to say hello, namaste, sat sri akal and salam alaikum, because we're bringing together people from around the world who are brought together by the love of poetry, especially poetry in Urdu, a language that is shared between India and Pakistan, a language which has one of the great literary traditions. And today we're talking about perhaps its leading light, Ghalib, the great poet who we all know as the poet of Delhi. Today, I think it's something rather special in Khushwant Singh's, as we remember Khushwant Singh, because not only, of course, did he love Urdu poetry very much, but also because we are crossing borders. And this is a theme of today's session. We are looking at two people who have worked across India, Pakistan, and we also have an American connection too. So let me introduce today's speakers. Raza Mir, who is introducing the session today, grew up in Hyderabad, India, and teaches in the USA. I believe he's in New Jersey right now, but he writes books on Urdu poetry. He's written The Taste of Words, an introduction to Urdu poetry, and is co-author of Anthems of Resistance. And he's also written a novel, which I've bought for a friend, though not yet read myself, called Murder at the Mushaira. And we hope there won't be a murder this afternoon as we discuss this topic. He is going to be talking to Anjum Altaf, who is based in Lahore, where he was Professor of Economics and Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at, I see it called Lahore University of Management Sciences, but more familiar to us all, of course, as LUMS, Lahore. So wonderful to have this here. He is co-author of Thinking with Ghalib, and his co-author is in India, in a place that Khushwant Singh himself would have loved, in the Kumaon Hills. And he's Amit Basole. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. I don't know the name Basole, but Amit is easy for me, who heads the Centre for Sustainable Employment at the Azim Premji University, working on what is called jobless growth in India. And he's also Associate Professor of Economics in the School of Arts and Sciences at the university. Amit is a double doctor, I gather, with a PhD in economics from the University of Massachusetts, as well from a PhD in neuroscience from Duke University. So we're coming together with people who are not only geographically differently located, but in different disciplines. But whatever the disciplines they work in, what really brings them together is love of this great poet of Delhi, poet of the world. Looking forward to hearing from you all. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that extremely generous and, should I say, evocative introduction. I am really excited to be speaking to Amit and Anjum. I came across their book project well before it was published, and I have been extremely fascinated by it. So, without further ado, I want to lead off by asking first Anjum and then Amit that would you just briefly tell us a little bit about how you connect your own personal self to Ghalib and how this particular book, this collaboration came about? So, Anjum first.
Sure, Raza. That's fairly easy. As has been mentioned, Khushwant Singh loved Ghalib, and I think that must have been so because they shared so many traits, like being irreverent, contrarian, challenging orthodoxy, inciting people to think for themselves, especially about faith and belief, and doing everything in a very playful and humorous way. So I think anybody who is fascinated by thinking connects with Ghalib very easily. And myself and Amit also, because we are economists. We want our students to be thinking about all the time about what they're working on, what they're researching. So this really, for me, didn't start as a project that had anything really to do with literary analysis or Ghalib studies or anything of that sort. It was an initiative to get people to think. And for that, like as economists, we found Ghalib to be the optimal resource for doing that. So we were using Ghalib to do the kinds of things that Khushwant Singh does in his book, get people to think about faith and belief. So that's how it started for me, and both independently of each other, Amit and I were, kind of exploring Ghalib from different angles. And thanks to the internet, we got together. And from that shared interest, this emerged, which ultimately turned into a book.
Thank you, Anjum. And Amit, would you add a little bit to this narrative?
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much, Raza. It's a pleasure to be talking with you in particular about this book, and really appreciate the support that you've given from the beginning. So just a little bit about the personal journey first. I think I first encountered Ghalib when I was maybe in my early 20s. I was doing my master's, and in my laboratory at the time there was a senior of mine from Kashmir who was a big fan of Ghalib, and he introduced me to Ghalib at the time. And I started reading a little bit, and I think, as with most people, it immediately resonated at a very personal level. At the time, I was not thinking about a lot of the stuff that made its way into the book, which is a very different thing that we will talk about. But just at a level of the issues that he was talking about and the way he was talking about it really spoke to me at that time. And then a few years later, I chanced on Francis Pritchard's wonderful website that I think many of our viewers may also know, Desert Full of Roses, which really offers excellent commentary on all of Ghalib's Urdu verses. And then as it turned, as Anjum mentioned, he and I were, at that time, blogs were new. The new thing in 2007-8, around that time. So both of us were blogging about Ghalib in different ways, and we encountered each other, actually, as it turns out, on the Columbia University Urdu list, which is also run by Francis Pritchard. And we found each other there, just by chance. And then we started this sort of online collaboration. We still haven't met ever in person. So, the borders being what they are, that still hasn't happened. But yeah, anyway, so.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful to acknowledge the role played by Francis Pritchard in bringing this book about. That is wonderful. And हुई मुद्दत के गालिब मर गया पर याद आता है वो हर एक बात पर कहना कि यूं होता तो क्या होता. तो सही बात है कि Ghalib really connects us in multiple ways. What I personally found fascinating about Ghalib is, first of all, Ghalib had a long life and a long career. And in that life and career, we are fortunate to have encountered what I may refer to as a witness to history. Ghalib was born in Mughal India, and by the time he died, Mughal India had turned into colonial India, and the cataclysmic events of the 1857 Ghadar, he was a witness to. And so I think that through his personality, we can really chart out history too. And the other thing is that, you know, it bears mentioning that he is the greatest Urdu stalwart. And so the turns of phrase that he created, a very philosophically minded person, have become standard tropes in Urdu language. So, to that extent, I think you did a wonderful job of putting it together. Could you just talk to me about how you chose the particular structure of that book, which is a very unique way to deal with Ghalib?
Yeah, so from the beginning, I think the idea was to just stick with a share and not take the ghazal approach, and just sort of talk about those two lines and what they bring to mind. Because a lot of what we in daily life do with Ghalib, as you are also familiar, is it's those two lines that come. We hardly ever recite a ghazal, as you just did. You recited a share. Which just happens to capture whatever is being discussed at the time. So we wanted to stay with that mood and say कि इस बात पे ये याद आया कि if Anjum were here, I think one of his favorite one is every time he hears some politicians in Pakistan or for that matter in India say something, the words that come to mind are खुशी से मर न जाते जो एतबार होता. So there are these sort of appropriate things that come to mind. So we thought we'll stick with that and say, okay, we'll just talk about this couplet and what brings to mind, what comes to mind when you see this couplet. The thing that is different is that we are not really doing a lot of, as Anjum said, literary interpretation. We have a translation which is mostly either taken from Pritchett or modified a little bit, and then most of the entry, so to speak, for a particular share is just us broadening its applicability to the social universe. And of course, I think many people might not like that. I think there's strong opinions on how much to read into this kind of poetry, and I'm sure there'll be people who say, well, you shouldn't use this verse to talk about this thing or whatever. So we've thrown that caution to the wind, and it helps that neither of us is coming from the world of literary analysis or Ghalib studies or anything like that. So we took liberties with it, and I guess some people may like it and some might not.
Sure, sure. And I think that what you just mentioned speaks very much to the structure of the ghazal. So, if I may just take a minute to talk about, for example, the particular ghazal that you, Khushi se mar na jate wali. The ghazal is a very unique, in the larger poetic context, a very unique form of poetry where the couplets in and of themselves are required to have a thematic coherence, but the ghazal itself does not require that. So, for one of Ghalib's most celebrated ghazals is the one that Amit mentioned. And if we may just look at it together, कि ये न थी हमारी किस्मत के विसाल यार होता, अगर और जीते रहते यही इंतजार होता. This is the matla. The first two lines rhyme. And now, very clearly he has articulated a position. It was not my fate to have a union with my beloved. And now that I am at my deathbed, perhaps, had I lived more, it would be the same, waiting. So the share moves on, the one that Amit partially quoted, कि तेरे वादे पर जिए हम. Look at the beauty of this share. तेरे वादे पर जिए हम तो ये जान झूठ जाना. Jan is no. That I lived despite your promise, understand it to be untrue. And the first line of the ghazal sets up a mystery, which then, of course, the second line solves. तेरे वादे पर जिए हम तो ये जान झूठ जाना कि खुशी से मर न जाते अगर एतबार होता. That had I really trusted you, I would have died of happiness. So yeah, the dripping irony of this share is such, and so each share in and of itself produces a world. कि कहूँ किससे मैं के क्या है, शबे गम बुरी बला है, मुझे क्या बुरा था मरना अगर एक बार
होता.
No, it would have been okay to die, but I die every day. I mean, the sheer pathos, the poignancy is there. And now the irony is left behind. The irony of the earlier share is left behind. And then, of course, as everybody knows, but it bears repeating, the Maqta of the Ghazal is one where the poet signs his name with a flourish. And in this case, Ghalib is a person who is not above, should I say, praising himself, and also in some ways putting himself down. And both of them come out in the Maqta of this Ghazal, which says, Ye masail tasawwuf, ye tera bayan Ghalib. Look at these matters, these metaphysical matters. Tasawwuf is really from the word Sufi, but metaphysical. You speak so metaphysically, you speak so philosophically, and you speak so eloquently. Ye tera bayan Ghalib, tujhe hum wali samajhte. We would have thought of you a saint. And then he puts himself down. Tujhe hum wali samajhte, jo na bada khar hota. Had you not been a drinker. So Ghalib, as we have often mentioned, was really not only proud of the fact that he drank, and in this way he connects to Khushwant Sahib a lot, because Khushwant Sahib loved his drink. He didn't drink a lot, but he always mentioned his whiskey all the time. So we connected. Ke tujhe hum wali samajhte, jo na bada khar hota. Look, all you people, when you see my metaphysics, don't think of me as this sort of saintly creature. I really love the, should I say, the pleasures that this world gives me. So I find that extraordinary. And I think that your choice of using one couplet and then expanding upon it really, really works. So to get back to the book then, Amit, how did you met this person, Anjum, on the list, and at some point in time, I guess you took your conversations offline. How did this book eventually take shape? Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, it's but we never really went offline. It's always been online in different forms. So we did a series of blog posts together about 12, 13 years ago. In fact, longer now, almost 14 years ago. And then that was it, really. We selected these couplets. There were about 30 couplets that we blogged about. We talked about them all online, email, and so forth. And it was many years later. And then we did our own things. I moved back to India. I started work at Azim Premji. Anjum was in Lahore for a bit. He went to Habib University in Karachi for a bit, came back to Lahore, retired. All of these things happened. And then during the pandemic, out of nowhere, I got an email from him saying, there's a lot of time now. All of us are sitting here, during lockdowns. Should we do something about these things that we've written? And, we've talked about having a book, but we never did it. So I said, sure. And that was the first time that, we seriously discussed the book. And he managed to find a publisher in Lahore, got it in manuscript form. I spoke to him for the first time only during the pandemic. I had never heard his voice, in all of these years that we had known each other. We had not spoken to each other. We did a video call. I saw him face to face, so to speak, only a couple of years ago. So the pandemic has really been largely responsible for bringing the book about and connecting us, much more closely than we were before. As it turns out, I actually visited Lahore once with great difficulty for 4 or 5 days, but I didn't meet him at the time, and he's been to Bangalore, but we have never met. So the book, during the pandemic, it just so happened that there was enough time to make it into one and look for publishers and so forth.
Great. And in terms of 30 couplets from a vast corpus of work, gives you a lot of latitude to choose. Is there a particular criterion you used for the choice, or did you sample it in particular ways?
Right. Anjum sir, he's come back. Raza sir was just asked about the selection of the couplets. So since I have been holding the conversation, maybe you would like to come in and talk a little bit about the choice of couplets and why we chose the ones that are there.
Yeah, thank you, Amit. I just wanted to add to that it's really what we mentioned was that the decision to go the couplet route rather than the ghazal route really worked out very well for you. So in this context, because the work is very big, how did you end up choosing your 30 ash'ar?
Sure. I think for the first part, we made a very conscious decision to go with the couplet rather than with the ghazal, because we were interested in the meaning, and because as you know, every couplet in ghazal means something, so thematic connectivity in that sense. So that was not the good unit of analysis for us. A lot more sense. And what we were trying to do to invite thinking, we selected the couplets that we thought were the most meaning intensive, that were layered and complex, and spoke to the. So for us, that was, I think, one of the primary criterion, that it would be, very meaning intensive. And Amit can more to that, because most of them were his selection, and I don't think that we were thinking very consciously at that time that they would end up in a collection. It happened to work out that way, that it turned out in hindsight to be a good selection.
Ji bilkul. I think that since Amit, you chose, maybe you could just say a little more, and then we'll spend some time quoting a little bit of Ghalib too.
Yeah. So I think as Anjum said, a lot of it was driven by this desire to think with Ghalib, and so I at least was often looking for verses that were off the beaten track too, right? So I remember sort of consciously going through the divan and saying, okay, what haven't I seen before? People sing certain ghazals, people quote certain ghazals, but there are so many more, as you said, Raza. It's a large collection. And then once in a while, a verse just jumps out at you, and the favorite one of mine for this purpose, it's not a general favorite verse, but just for how it jumps out at you, is actually in the book towards the end, and that is Wafadari basharte ustuwari asle iman hai. Mare but khane mein to kaabe mein gaado Brahman ko. I had to read it many times to make sure I was actually reading what I thought I was reading, because I'd never heard this verse before, and it was such a strong image. And first of all, just seeing Ghalib use the word Brahman was new for me, because we don't hear about these verses so often. So what is he talking about? Why is this Brahman dying in the temple, and why is he being buried in the, mare putkhane mein to kaabe mein gaado Brahman ko? That really grabs you by the throat. So some of these couplets, I think they really invite you to wrestle with what he's saying, and he's deliberately twisting upending the symbolism. He's doing all of this sort of, what in the Kabir context you might call ulat bani. Kaabe mein ja bajayenge naku, sab to banda hai der mein haram. So just mashing things up and mixing them up and so forth. So part of these verses are really like that, where you want to choose a verse to make a particular point. And the very first verse with the book, which the book opens with, kya farz hai ki sabko mile ek sa jawab. Again, it's a conscious choice to say, okay, how do we bring in the reader to think about things, and what better way to start than to quote Ghalib and saying, let us ask these questions. It's not necessary that all of us will get the same answers, right? So each one has its own discovery. Yeah.
Very nice. And I think that we could spend, there are various themes that emerge from what you said. For example, the trope of the Brahman is used very well by Ghalib, and is used, if I may say so, very lovingly, right? For example, in another place he says, देखिए पाते हैं उस शाख बुतों से क्या फैज, एक ब्राह्मण ने कहा है कि ये साल अच्छा है. So the Brahman here functions as a soothsayer. I like to use this as a New Year's greeting to my friends. Let us see uh, what lovers get from idols. Lovers on one side, idols on another side. Now, I don't want to interpret this, and you people, both of you, have done an excellent job of leaving interpretive latitude to your readers in the speech. But the Brahman comes here almost as a guarantor, that something in the future will work very well. In another place, Ghalib says, नहीं है सुबो जुन्नार के फंदे में गिर आई, वफादारी में शेखो बरहमन की आजमाइश है. Subba is the tasbih, the rosary beads that the Muslims use in their prayer. And Zunnar is the thread that the Brahman wears. So both of them are markers of faith. And he says, neither of them really have any hold. What really has hold, perhaps, is this business of wafadari, staying constant. And wafadari mein Shaykh or Barhaman ki azmaish hai. They are both going to be tested. And this connects so beautifully with the verse that you mentioned. Ki wafadari basharte ustuari. Ustuari means constancy, right? It's not enough to have faith, but when things go bad, it is then that you have to be strong. Wafadari basharte ustuari asl iman hai. Iman ka asl hai. And the proof of that is that if the Brahman stays true to his faith, then even by the standards of the Kaaba, he has passed a test. Very, very beautifully done and very excellent suggestion. And Anjum, perhaps you could talk about another such share that you incorporated in your book, which spoke to you, if you wish.
Raza, all these three mentioned, they are all in the book. Because like you, we were also very taken with them and with the message that they were conveying, especially in the times in which we are living today. They are very, very relevant. I like the couplets that are at the beginning of the book because they induce the reader new to Ghalib to this legitimizing this whole process of and also having a particular attitude, critical attitude to authority. That you don't just because somebody is a in some subject, you don't take everything that he or she says for granted. So the first couplet already Amit has mentioned. क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब, आओ ना हम भी सैर करें कोए तूर की. The way this to a whole tradition and jolts up the reader because it hits very close to something that they are familiar with in their own culture. I mean, we've used something from other places like military, but it doesn't connect in that same way. So in that spirit, I think that the second couplet also appeals to me a lot, where Ghalib says, "Lazim nahi ke khizr ki hum पैरवी, ना के एक बुजुर्ग हमें हम सफर मिले." Right. So, which we have explored to say that, okay, even Ghalib is a traveler for us. We hear what he's, but it's not we follow everything somebody says blindly, and very, very powerful message as far as critical, just questioning everything, thinking about it on one's own. So those two are I like very much, and at this stage for what follows on the various themes, on the theme that was important to Ghalib and also to Khushwant Singh. If you read his book, it comes back again and again to faith and belief and religion. So those are the ones that we end with. And we structured the book in the first few couplets are quite easy to read and to understand and to become familiar with. And they increase in complexity as we go towards the end. And towards the end, the last one, I think, is the most complex, and Amit likes it. I like him to read number 30.
Before that, Raza, were you saying something? I thought,
no, I will connect it. I just, okay, let me just say one thing that both of them, the points that Anjum mentioned, क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब, आओ कि आज सैर करें कोहे तूर की. It really connects to the trip that the Prophet Moses made to the Mount Sinai, to the point of Mount Sinai, and where he is where he is believed to have actually communicated with God and got back a part, which is the Ten Commandments and such. So I think that Ghalib's each share, if you go and kind of plumb it for meaning, then what you do is you end up connecting to a whole tradition. The other one that Anjum mentioned talks about Khizr. Khizr is known to be somebody who shows the way to people and also somebody who has had a long life. All that simply connects so beautifully. If you know it, that's great. So if you don't know it, the share still makes sense to you. So I think this is the beauty of Ghalib and any poet, that you understand it at one layer and then you understand it at the second layer, and if you have the guts, then go down and find the third layer as well. So wonderful. Amit, please go ahead and talk about the share number 13.
Yeah, sure. So that's what we end with, and as Anjum said, this has a lot of terminology in it, like the preceding few also. This is the one, हम मुहिद हैं, हमारा केश है तर्क रसूम, मिल्लतें जब मिट गईं अज्जाए ईमान हो गईं. I think that is the one Anjum was referring to. That is the last one. So हम मुहिद हैं, we are monists, and हमारा केश है तर्क रसूम. So what is religion for us? It is the renunciation of all of these customs, and when these different millats, these communities disappear, they become part of this sort of true faith. Millatein jab mit gayi ajzaye ima ho gayi. And again, it's a verse that you can interpret in a very conventional way, of course, which is always possible. You can say, well, it's talking about Islam, it's talking about communities accepting the faith and so forth. But then it also opens many other possibilities of readings. What are these communities? What is this true faith? Maybe we are talking about, people dissolving their differences and becoming human. The ultimate sort of faith. So he leaves all of those possibilities, open to us, which is what is really wonderful about him. And I just wanted to pick up on one small thing that you mentioned at the beginning, Raza, on the 1857 and the Ghadar and so forth. And this is just in case the viewers are not aware that Zia Muhyiddin, the fantastic Pakistani actor who has done a lot of readings and recitations, has a wonderful collection of Ghalib's letters that he has read, many of which are also about 1857 too. And I think seeing, reading those or listening to Zia Muhyiddin recite them, it also gives you a very good insight into how, why Ghalib was writing about all of this the way he was. right? And the changes that he was seeing. You mentioned that he's born, he's born when in fact the British are not even in Delhi, right? This is before the British takeover of Delhi, and then he dies after 1857. So it's a period of profound change, and you can see that he's commenting all those changes. And there are some very, very nice little things I love in those letters, like he's talking about the new postal system, right? And saying, well, what's this new system that has come? I'm trying to understand it, and it gives you a very good sense of the context in which he's living, and he's communicating with all of these people, the changes that he's seeing. He goes to Calcutta for the first time. He sees what the British have done, and I think all of that kind of comes into his poetry and makes him extremely modern. Like we say in the introduction, he's a very, very modern poet in his concerns and in the way he approaches them and all of that. So just wanted to make that connection.
Yes, and it is very important to understand one thing, that after the 1857 revolt happened, the British responded with a level of violence that was, terrifying. And if somebody had to live there and ply their trade in that matter, they had to be very, very circumspect. Ghalib has written some ash'ar on the Ghadar, but kahin chape nahi wo. They were put in his khutut. Just to go back to one point that Amit said, the modernity of Ghalib is very apparent in the letters that he wrote. He is perhaps the first person to have carried out a long series of correspondences with a variety of his peers, and in his lifetime, his khutut were collected and published. And so it perhaps is one of the first instances of this form of prose poetry, prose non-fiction in Urdu. And in one of his letters to his friend Hargopal Tafta, he says, he quotes a शेर जिसके चार मिसरे मैं सुनाता हूं कि चौक जिसको कहें वो मख्तल है, घर बना है नमूना जिंदा का, इस तरह के विसाल से गालिब क्या मिटे दिल से दाग हिजरा का. That what we used to call the marketplace is right now a battlefield, and therefore we are confined to our houses, and the house has itself become a dungeon of sorts. And now what we thought of as the meeting, as the union of lovers, has become a poignant separation. And so Ghalib actually is one of the historians of 1857. His book called Dastambu, which really encounters the rebellion, which recounts the rebellion, written in Persian, perhaps to evade certain censorship. And you can see some of the encounters of 1857 in there. So that is an extremely, wonderful thing. But to go back to the sher that you quoted, "Hum muwahhid hai, hamara kaish hai tarke rusum." This business of, at that point in time, perhaps there were tremendous contestations within Muslims about different kinds of Muslim sects. But because Ghalib went all the way to Banaras and then to Lucknow and then to all the way to Calcutta, in Banaras, of course, he encountered a lot of, Hindu thought. He wrote a very famous Persian Masnavi called Charagh-e-Dair, in which he describes Banaras as such, ke ibadat khana-e nakhusiyan ast, Farsi, hamana Kaaba-e Hindustan ast, meaning it is the worshipping ground of conches, the ones that you used to blow, and it is the Kaaba of India. So you can see that he has a tremendous, should I say, affection for this. And then he goes to Lucknow, where, of course, the Shias, particularly Anis and Dabir, are plying their trade. And he develops a tremendous love for Imam Ali and Imam Hussein. And so he brings in the Shia Sunni element. And all the way to Calcutta. Calcutta, you remember, is a churning in the 19th century, where the Brahmo Samaj is coming out. And there, the interaction is really between traditional Hinduism and the modernity represented by, the Christians and the Britishers. So, in some sense, he's imbibing, he's osmotically, getting all this, and then he includes it in his shairi, so that hum wahid hai, hamara cash hai tarke rasum. But the second line is really the hard-hitting one, isn't it? Millatein jab mit gayi, ajzaye ima ho gaye. If you break these boundaries between faith groups, only then you will really find the true faith. So wonderful. And Anjum, maybe talk a little bit more about the book and maybe one of your favorite poems, favorite couplets. One.
Sure. Raza, I just add that about the letters, Ghalib has also talked about the epidemic in those letters. In one, I think it is July 1861 to the Majru, in which there is a sher, ho chuki Ghalib balaएं सब तमाम, एक मर गए नागहानी और है. And there he describes the episode. Given that we are in the time of the pandemic, I gives you a sense that this is not the first time that people living and in the Istanbul itself mentioned there is a lot of discussion. People dying. These I think it was a thing that so yes, and sure there are some couplets that are light-hearted and making big points in a very playful manner. को मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत, दिल के खुश रख को गालिब ये ख्याल अच्छा है. And then the next one that I like even more is कम नहीं जलवागरी में कूचे से बहिश्त, यही नक्शा है वले इस कदर आबाद में. So to me Ghalib across as a philosopher in the garb of a poet, and these are really making very big major points that indicate very with listeners. I mean, one can read very complex philosophy, but you really need to have a PhD to understand those concepts. But with Ghalib, in 10 words, he can overview you. That's the fascinating part about Ghalib.
Indeed. And, you mentioned the maqta of the ghazal that said, Ke ho chuki Ghalib balaएं सब तमाम, एक मर्गे नागहानी और है. I never really connected it to the epidemic, but now that you mention it, again, it goes back to the points that Amit was making, that and Anjum as well, कि ये जो ghazal है, it's just should I say a poetic and wordsmithing constraint that is placed by the poet on themselves. Otherwise, the ash'ar are free to discuss different things. So, for example, in the same ghazal that Anjum quoted, the matla goes ke koi din gar zindagani aur hai, although I have a little more to live, apne ji mein humne thani aur hai. I have other plans for myself, and I particularly like one of the more playful ash'ar of that ghazal that go de ke khat muh dekhta hai namabar. So you are sending a message, and imagine somebody is giving you the missive, and you've got it, you're reading it, but the person who sent the missive is waiting. दे के खत मुंह देखता है नामबर, कोई पैगाम ज़बानी और है. That there is a further addendum. So sometimes, things should be expressed in words. So that is really beautifully done. And then immediately very reflective. कि हो चुकी गालिब बलाएं सब तमाम. So it just shows how much a ghazal goes up and down. When I used to listen to Hindustani music, that I realized that that's what it is. A rag places certain constraints on the musician, but उन constraints के अंदर जो ये लोग improvise करते हैं, that is the true mark of a musician. And since we talked about sending letters, देखे खत मुंह देखता है नामबर, I wanted to also mention another one के मगर लिखवाए कोई उनको खत तो हमसे लिखवाए, हुई सुबह और घर से कान पर रखकर कलम निकले. See, this is a very funny one, that my lover has many suitors and they all want to write letters. If they want to write letters to my lover, although they are my rivals, I'm happy to write letters for them, because in the process I actualize my love. So मगर लिखवाए कोई उनको खत तो हमसे लिखवाए, I'm ready. हुई सुबह और घर से कान पर रखकर कलम निकली. So I think that it is a beautiful way in which Ghalib constantly talks about writing letters to the beloved. So हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत. ये जन्नत की हकीकत क्या है? That there is no heaven, there is no hell. Perhaps this is what Ghalib is saying. हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत. It's no big deal. And then you put a fulcrum there called लेकिन. हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत, लेकिन what does it do? The mystery is created, and the second line solves it. दिल के खुश रखने को गालिब ये ख्याल अच्छा है. It does its job. It does its job. This idea of heaven and hell, that it keeps you at least placated. And so that's a very beautiful way in which he puts it forward. Some more, Anjum, anything else that really comes to your mind?
Raza, I want to say a few more things about the book. How it obviously the connection of Ghalib with Khushwant Singh is very obvious and very strong. So I'm glad we talked about that a lot. But at least two other passions of Khushwant Singh that the book resonates. The first is his the importance that he places on friendship. The friendship that rises beyond the constraints of caste and creed and legend, and is centered on interests and passions. So if you read Khushwant Singh, again and again he comes back to Manzoor Qadir, mentioning he was how close of a friendship it was, and how it was beyond any kinds of limitations. And I think that my relationship with Amit started with a passion and an interest, and then grew into something that is not really concerned with anything. And I think that Khushwant Singh would really have approved of that. And the other thing, the way the book connects with Khushwant Singh is this whole theme of crossing borders, and he felt about relations between countries were created, and his emphasis on being human. Really, the way to resolve differences is not through blows, but through talking to each other, engaging with each other, conversing with each other. And I think that this book illustrates this the crossing of borders, the coming together, the talking. And I think Khushwant Singh would also have approved of that, and that makes me very, very happy and really honored to connect Khushwant Singh to India a number of times. And Khushwant Singh was very important. He was bigger than life. He was very important in our house. I inherited Train to Khan from my father's library. I read it when it sold, and then it went all over. My wife read it. 2 sons read it. Still have that from like maybe this published somewhere in the 1950s. It's an old thing, still in my library. And when I was looking for it, I found 5 other books by Khush, all of them, like here. So it's when I went to India, I tried to meet Khushwant Singh because it's a cool relationship. But my wife, when she was there, in 1991, she didn't have the same compunction. So she got an invitation and did meet Khushwant Singh, and for that was enough of an association. And being on the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival is really a way of coming together, which gives a lot of pleasure.
Thank you. That is really, really wonderful. In fact, if we may connect him to Ghalib in this way, क्योंकि उनका भी एक बड़ा मुनफरिद और बेहतरीन अंदाज था लिखने का खुशवंत साहब का, कि हैं और भी दुनिया में सुखनवर बहुत अच्छे, कहते हैं कि खुशवंत का है अंदाज़े बयां। और इसमें कोई शक नहीं कि these people were very should I say important markers of their time. And yeah, the history of, I mean, reading about the life of Ghalib or the life of Khushwant Singh really puts us in touch with that time, and that is really wonderful. So by way of closing then, Amit, I would like you to give us your final reflections about what your hopes are for this book and what you plan to do going forward.
जी बिल्कुल. So I just want to go back to what Anjum was saying, हम about borders and so forth. हम लोग जिस दौर से अभी गुजर रहे हैं इंडिया में, पाकिस्तान में और जगह पर भी, I think we are going to need all the cultural resources at our disposal to see us through these times and emerge as what we think our cultures are capable of emerging as. And we see this very much as part of that. Ghalib is one person, but really what the experiment, the sort of South Asian cultural experiment has been over these past hundreds of years, it transcends not only religion but class and many boundaries. So we've got these dialogues going on at every level of society. Right? So somebody like Kabir is talking at a very different level from where Ghalib is talking, but they are deeply engaging with difference and trying to find that human connection which will build a strong society. So without being too grand about this book, obviously I have no illusions that this book is going to do it, but for me it is about that. It's a long fight. I think we are in for a very, very long fight, and we need all the love that has been produced by people like this. I mean, that's what you see, right? When you read somebody like Ghalib, you just, what Anjum was saying, it's wo jo hum zauki hai, which connects people, that you and I seem to resonate with this one thing. We are going to need a lot of that, and I hope that this book is one step in that direction.
Yes, indeed, and both of you have. I would like to. First of all, Anjum, would you like to make concluding remarks? Because then I'll just say a little about your book and close the session.
Raza, just that I hope there's other people to form links and collaborate. We have shown, Amit and I, this has not been mentioned, but we still have not met face to face. We have done all this online through Zoom, etc. And it's possible if people, shared concerns, shared aspirations, we should connect at the level of individuals, and that is how I think we can overcome, the barriers that are placed in our way. I think that's my.
Thank you. So this is a very unique collaboration. Therefore, it is a collaboration. ये दो हस्तियां जो हैं अमित और अंजुम, उनके दरमियान एक बहुत ही गैर ज़रूरी सरहद है. There is a boundary that is beyond, which is unnecessary, at least for the connections that they can develop for themselves. And so I want to conclude by quoting two ashar. Both of them find a place in Anjum and Amit's book. कि पहला तो ये है कि है परे सरहद इदराक से अपना मस्जूद. That my worship, my place of worship is beyond the boundary of understanding even. So it goes into some spiritual realm, but I want to focus on the fact that it's boundary spanning. है परे सरहदे इदराक से अपना मस्जूद, क़िबला को अहले नज़र क़िबला नुमा कहते हैं. What you think of as the place you want to bow your head is nothing but a compass. It's just showing you the way. And therefore, different groups can find ways in which to cross that boundary. And finally, in closing, I would like to say that what is going on, like Amit said, it's going to require a certain amount of, active pushing back against all the forces that divide us. But it also helps to have an ironic attitude. And Ghalib says, बनाकर फ़कीरों का हम भेस गालिब, बनाकर फ़कीरों का हम भेस गालिब, तमाशाए अहले करम देखते हैं. That we pretend to be, gestures almost. Faqir here, of course, is somebody who is not really concerned. We pretend to be that, and we just watch the procession of the world as it goes by. I thank Amit and Anjum profusely for the wonderful work they have done in putting out this book, Thinking with Ghalib. And I hope that our listeners enjoyed the session and look forward to having more such sessions in the future. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to the organizers of the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival, and more power to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was really wonderful. And I was privileged to have a look at the book today. And one of the things I really appreciated about it was the fact that you had used different scripts so that the book would be accessible to people from different parts of South Asia, and indeed from London. I'm from the department that had Ralph Russell in it. So Ghalib has been very much around me for a long time in my life. But one thing I would like to say after this wonderful talk is that something about relating it to the Khushwant Singh borders theme, but also to his ecology theme. Because one thing the festival does is, together with Grow Trees, they plant a tree for every speaker at the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival since it began 10 years ago. And this year they are trees for tigers, which are going to be planted in the Sundarbans National Park in West Bengal. And for the younger viewers, it might surprise them perhaps that Anjum Altaf was born in Narayanganj, which is now in Bangladesh, I believe. And those of us who have read Nirad Chaudhary, whose son also taught at my college, are very familiar with Narayanganj. And so this connection, again, we're always seeing these loops and circles, and we go round and we move forwards, but always keeping these connections open. And I think Ghalib, Khushwant Singh, and People like you are great ways of connecting us across borders. Many thanks to all of you for such a wonderful and stimulating session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.